Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives. I'm Heidi Sigmund Kuda, and today, Hi-Fi Jim and I have a breaker for you. We are bringing back our friend, investigative journalist Craig Unger, who has written multiple books on Trump and his ties to Russia. And in case you missed it, Trump is still a Russian asset. Have a listen. Craig Unger, the most revered Craig Unger, who's been on our show probably more times than anybody. We are so grateful to have you back. So grateful for your work. And before we jump into our topic today, I just want to get a sense of what it's like to be the it boy after 40 years. Like Craig Unger has been discovered. Like, what's it like?
Well, I'm not sure I've been discovered in this country. It's been very weird the last few weeks, which is I have gotten a lot of attention from media overseas in the UK, in France, in Austria, Poland, Germany. But it's not so much in the United States. It's what's very odd to me is that I wrote House of Trump, House of Putin. I think it came out 7 years ago. And I got a fair amount of attention then. I did pretty well. But now you can't say what I was saying back then, which is that Donald Trump is a Russian asset. And I've done two books that sort of tell you step by step exactly how that happened. And overseas, people started paying attention to it the minute Zelensky was in the White House with Trump, and Trump was basically uh, clearly siding with Vladimir Putin. And you could see in real time what it meant for him to be a Russian asset. So suddenly, I think had enormous credibility. But now in the United States, I don't think you can really say that in the mainstream media anymore. You could 5 years ago, but not now.
Oh man. Well, I'm really, really glad that Europe is catching on to your work because you've been doing this reporting for a very long time. And that's kind of where I wanted to quickly start with you. Your response to what happened with Zelensky in the Oval Office. Our friend, Dr. Michael McKay, said for him, it was like watching a Soviet show trial from 1938. I looked at it like, the moment that we surrendered to Russia in full view of the world. And the KGB finally wins the Cold War. But I'd love to hear from you just what your gut response was in that moment.
Well, I mean, it's pretty much the same. I mean, essentially, uh, Donald Trump is carrying out Putin's policies. It's really as simple as that. And it's sort of horrifying. I'm old enough that I grew up, my favorite movie as a kid was The Manchurian Candidate. And it called forth all this conspiratorial paranoia, the idea that communists would take over the White House. And yet here you have Donald Trump uh, basically implementing Kremlin talking points again and again and again. And it has to do with a pretty major war going on in Ukraine that quite possibly could lead to something much, much worse.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And high five, why don't you take us into why we're with Craig today?
But the reason I wanted to bring you on, Craig, is you wrote a really great article on Steve Witkoff on your Substack, The Putin Point Man. And I wanted you to come on the show. We know today that, Rubio and Witkoff are walking away from the negotiations, which were never being done in good faith anyway, let's be honest, right? But tell us about Steve Witkoff's ties to Russia, please.
Right. Well, Witkoff, I first came across him when I was writing House of Trump, House of Putin, and I left him out because it seemed like a loose end and it's only connecting now. But he was he in New York real estate circle, he is a big, big player. He owns the Woolworth building, which is one of the greatest buildings in the entire country. He owns a lot of other buildings like the Daily News building, quite a few others. I mean, he's a multi-billionaire. He's got at least $2 billion. But what struck me about him back 7 years ago when I was doing House of Trump was that there was a bust in Trump Tower of a poker game, $100 million poker game on the 63rd floor. Now, this is the considered the most desirable apartment in the entire building. it is directly under Donald Trump's penthouse suite. So it was the most desirable one that was for sale. If that is, if you fancy living beneath Donald Trump, which I'm not sure everyone does. Um, and this poker game was a big deal. I think 34 people were busted. It was a raid by the Southern District of New York that was then under control of Preet Bharara. And it was a famous poker game. It sort of morphed into, there's a movie out called Molly's Game, and it morphed into that because a lot of Hollywood celebrities like Matt Damon and Ben Affleck and Leonardo DiCaprio were part of it. What struck me is what was so interesting about it is one of the principals of the game was a Russian mobster named Anatoly Golovchik. And while he was being sentenced, I think he got a 5-year sentence, a prison sentence. But while he was being sentenced, he wanted to buy another apartment and he needed a reference. And he went to a guy I had never heard of back then, but his name was Steve Witkoff. And so the question is, why was Steve Witkoff vouching for the Russian mafia? And it was followed up by there's a real estate industry newsletter called The Real Deal. And they followed the story and they interviewed Witkoff about it in 2013. And he said, "Oh, I didn't really know Golubchik. I was doing it for a mutual friend." Well, who's a mutual friend? I don't know the answer to that, but the first name that comes to mind would be Donald Trump, I think. It may not be Trump, and there were a lot of other people who were of interest who were busted then. But given what we know about the Russian mafia, I think this is really, really interesting because the Russian mafia is sort of the enforcement arm of Russian intelligence. And back in the days of the Soviet Union, that was true for the KGB, and it's true for the FSB and the SVR today. So let's think about this a little more. Trump is sending Witkoff as an envoy to the two hottest spots in the world diplomatically, the Middle East and Moscow. He's had zero diplomatic experience, less than you or I. I mean, he's had absolutely zero. But he's friendly with the Russian mafia, or at least he's friendly enough to give a recommendation for them. And that says everything, I think. It means, I mean, Witkoff has also been a golfing buddy of Trump for decades. And that's all you need to know is that he's going to be doing whatever Trump wants him to do, and Trump, in turn, is doing what Vladimir Putin wants him to do.
It's just chilling stuff, and it must be just exasperating because, again, you've been writing about these guys for a long time, and now you're seeing all of this take place in and around the powers of, the Oval Office, the Kremlin. It is absolutely staggering. Jim.
Oh, I wanted to I think it's, at least adjacent related, the tariffs that Trump is putting on right now. Um, there's an interview with Larry King in 1987, which I'm sure you're aware of.
I
That
I
that
I
happens
asked one of my
right
posters.
after
Yeah, yeah.
just briefly, right after the trip to Moscow, where he does in many ways what he threatens to do what in many ways he's doing now. Back then it was Saudi Arabia and Japan because they were the enemies of the day that would help the Soviet Union at the time. But now he seems to be pulling exactly the same play as he did then. And last thing, that day was the same day that he put the full page ad out in the New York Times, which wanted us to suddenly become isolationist. I wanted to get your thoughts on the parallels between that moment and this moment.
Well, it I think it's remarkable because 38 years have passed, 38 years. And if you go to the advertisement he took out in the New York Times, Washington Post, and so forth, it followed. It was just a few weeks after he had returned uh, from his first trip to the Soviet Union. That, as I reported in American Compromise, that was completely orchestrated by the KGB. They had sort of set a trap for him. They'd been luring him in, giving him. Uh, uh, they gave him a deal on some cheap TV sets for the hotel he was developing, the Grand Hyatt Hotel. So suddenly he's friendly with these guys. I mean, if you think about it, a big franchise operation like Hyatt or Marriott, where they need thousands of TV sets, and they generally make deals with Sony or LG or Samsung or a major vendor like that. But Trump, in developing it, got them from a place called Joy Ludd Electronics, which is relatively small compared to those consumer giants, but it was really a front for the KGB. And that's how the whole relationship started, as far as I can tell. There may have been some other contacts even earlier
He
through.
was cheap on TVs.
I
That's
mean,
great.
right. And if you look at how they lured Trump in, it was a good deal he couldn't refuse on cheap TVs. There were beautiful women, no doubt, when they took him to Moscow. And the idea of putting up Trump Tower, and this is now being revived. I mean, that's one of the things in the last couple of hours, to put a Trump Tower near Red Square in the Kremlin. And back in 87, during his very first trip there, that was absurd if anyone's old enough to remember the Cold War. Even though Gorbachev was then uh, General Secretary of the Soviet Union, and he was very sort of a genial peacemaker. He was still very much a communist, and he didn't want the idea of having a monument to conspicuous consumption, a gaudy, glitzy, Vegas-like monument on Red Square near the Kremlin. That did not make sense to anyone except for Donald J. Trump.
It's really exciting to hear many of these stories again. Those of us who read your books, of course, are aware of it. You tell a great story that you recently retold in your Substack about how Donald Trump pretended to have met Gorbachev, on this trip. And that it's just such a weird anecdote, but it is so indicative of this, superb liar, superb propagandist. Um, my last question for you, and if the gentlemen have more, feel free to jump in, is that you've been reporting on this for so long. Wayne Barrett reported on it before you. Karen DeWeesha reported on it. You have stated flatly and unequivocally, based on empirical evidence that you provide in your books, that Trump is a Russian asset, and yet people in America still seem oblivious to this issue. Is there anything else that you can help us with for our viewers to tell their networks to get past that? Because I don't think that we're going to see any way out until we actually acknowledge that America right now is literally under occupation in the way that some of the, Eastern European countries are. And how do we explain that to people?
Right. Well, I do think there's been a real failure of the media and all this, and you just mentioned in 1987, I mean that the lie that Trump had met with Gorbachev appeared in the New York Times, and what I strongly suspect happened, it was not sourced. I went back and checked, and I'm 90% sure Trump fed it to the reporter on background and said, "You can't use me as a source, but I met with Gorbachev." That's the way it appears to have been written. It was a lie. And that's the way Trump works. But he is aided and abetted by a media that is complicit in that regard. And it's still going on even today. And I was thinking back to when, as I said, House of Trump, House of Putin came out in 2018, I believe, 7 years ago. And back then, you could say that Trump was a Russian asset. It seemed that it was possible to say that. but gradually it's been suppressed. And we've heard again and again that Trump Russia is a hoax. Trump Russia is a hoax. The Mueller report didn't have anything in it. And people don't have the attention span, I think, to do the deep dives. And it's very sad. And I think, Fox News has been part of the problem. But also, and social media is just been dreadful for the most part.
Can I just point out briefly, on a follow-up to that? So I was, looking for things and watched that interview with Larry King. Larry King doesn't ask him, hey, why this whole foreign policy thing that you're suddenly jumping into, doesn't have anything to do with you getting back from the Soviet Union 6 weeks ago, does it? The sort of gullibility and the willingness to go along with this kind of propaganda, I think, ultimately is also to blame.
Right, right. I mean, it's really true. No one, I mean, it's the old access game. If you want access to Donald Trump, you don't ask him the tough questions. That's true of most politicians. But Trump really plays it to a T, and people go along with it. I mean, it's good for ratings to get him on your show. I mean,
Yeah.
look at Fox News, is still around. I mean, it's unbelievable to me.
High fidelity. Anything else from you?
Do you think, Craig, that once Europe understands it and starts repeating the message that Trump is a Russian asset, maybe then Americans will get it?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I've yeah, in doing all these interviews, people ask me, well, can Europe trust America in terms of sharing intelligence? And I say, absolutely not.
Yeah, hell no.
No,
Hell
No, no,
no.
to say
no.
that my country thinks of Europe as an enemy. I mean, it's just sort of horrifying. The Western Alliance helped build democratic institutions in 30 countries, or however many there in Europe, strong market economies, and strong military allies. Why are we turning against it? It doesn't make any sense, unless you're the only one it makes sense to is Vladimir Putin. And I think that's why Trump is moving in that direction.
There's just so much that we are indebted to you for, and so many things that we have all learned from you along the way. And I just wish that we were meeting on the other side of this. I don't know what it's going to look like, but when you have to tell European leaders that you can't trust America, that really is a sum up of where we are. Craig Unger, the books are House of Trump, House of Putin, American Compromat, Den of Spies, and most importantly, support him. Incredible. You're not only pulling things out of the archives, but you're also breaking news. And we appreciate you so much being with us here today. And we hope you come back.
Well, I'd be delighted to, and thank you very much.